It was a cold, windy evening when Officer James Carter began his regular patrol through the quiet streets of his small town. The sun had already set, and the streetlights glowed faintly, casting long shadows on the empty roads. James had been a police officer for over 15 years, and he had seen his fair share of crime and hardship. But that night, he had no idea that he was about to witness something that would change his life forever. Driving slowly in his patrol car, James noticed an old, run-down building at the end of an alley. The windows were broken, and the bricks were covered with years of dust and dirt. It looked abandoned, the kind of place where no one should be. But something caught his attention, a faint sound. It wasn't the usual noise of the wind or a stray cat. It was different. It sounded like soft crying. James parked his car and stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. The air was freezing, and his breath came out in small clouds. He listened again, and this time he was sure it was the sound of children. His heart beat a little faster. He knew he had to check. Pushing open the rusty door, James entered the dark, damp space. The smell of mold and dust filled his nose. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across piles of trash, old furniture, and broken glass. Then, in the far corner of the room, he saw movement. Huddled together, wrapped in thin, torn blankets, were 6 little girls. Their clothes were dirty, their faces pale, and their eyes wide with fear. They looked at him like frightened animals, unsure if he was there to help or harm them. The oldest one couldn't have been more than 12, and the youngest seemed just 3 or 4 years old. James's heart sank. He knelt down slowly so he wouldn't scare them and spoke gently. "It's okay. I'm here to help you." His voice was calm, but inside he was fighting back shock and anger. How could anyone leave children like this? The oldest girl didn't speak right away. She held the younger ones close, as if protecting them from the world. Finally, in a soft voice, she said, "We have nowhere to go." That simple sentence broke James's heart. He could see the hunger in their eyes, the exhaustion in their bodies, and the hopelessness in their expressions. He asked them their names, but some of the younger ones were too shy or scared to answer. He learned that they had been moving from place to place, trying to survive after being abandoned by the only family they had. For days, they had eaten almost nothing, drinking only water from a nearby tap. James felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him. These were not just names and faces, these were children who had been forgotten by the world. They were freezing, hungry, and alone in a place where no child should ever be. Without wasting time, James took off his thick police jacket and wrapped it around the youngest girl, who was shivering. He radioed for assistance, but already knew in his heart that he couldn't just hand them over to strangers and walk away as they waited for help. James tried to make them feel safe. He told them stories, made silly faces for the younger ones, and even shared the snacks he had in his patrol car. Slowly, the fear in their eyes began to fade, replaced by a small spark of trust. When an ambulance arrived to check on the girls, James stayed by their side, holding their hands as they were given warm blankets and hot drinks. One of the girls whispered, "Don't leave us." The words hit him deep. But he realized something. He couldn't let them go. Not to a system that might split them apart. Not to a future where they might end up in the same hopeless place again. That night, as the cold wind howled outside, James made a silent promise. He didn't know how, but he would find a way to give these 6 girls the life they deserved. What began as a routine patrol had turned into the most important mission of his life, a mission not of law enforcement, but of love and compassion. He didn't see them as strangers anymore. In his heart, they were already family. James Carter could not sleep that night. After finishing his shift, he went home, but his mind kept returning to the sight of those 6 little girls. He could still see their frightened eyes, their tiny, hands clutching one another, their voices barely above a whisper. He had been a police officer long enough to know that there were many heartbreaking stories in the world, but this one had gripped his soul in a way he couldn't explain. Lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling, his thoughts restless. The logical side of his mind told him that the girls would now be in the care of social services. That was the normal process. But the other side of his heart, the side that had been touched deeply, knew the reality. He had seen the system from the inside. He knew there was a chance the girls would be separated, sent to different foster homes, maybe never seeing each other again. The thought made his chest tighten. He tried to reason with himself. You're a single man. You work long hours. Never been a father. How could you possibly raise 6 children? But each time he tried to push the idea away, the image of their little faces came back, stronger than before. By morning, James knew he couldn't pretend this wasn't his problem. He drove to the hospital where the girls had been taken for a checkup. When he walked in, the nurse recognized him immediately. "They've been asking about you," she said with a smile. "They wanted to know if you were coming back." Those words felt like a spark in his heart. He followed the nurse to a small pediatric ward where the girls were sitting together on one bed, eating breakfast. The moment they saw him, their faces lit up, not with the polite smile you give a stranger, but with genuine relief, as if they had been waiting for him all along. The oldest girl, Emily, was the first to speak. "We thought you left." James knelt down so he was at eye level. "I did go home," he said softly, "but I couldn't stop thinking about you." The youngest, Lily, climbed down from the bed and wrapped her tiny arms around his leg. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried a meaning far bigger than words. That was the moment James's decision was made. Not in a burst of drama or a grand speech, but in the quiet, undeniable realization that his life had just changed forever. Over the next few days, James began the process of talking to child services. At first, they were skeptical. A single man adopting 6 unrelated children. It was unheard of. They explained the challenges, the financial responsibility, the emotional strain. They told him he could choose to adopt 1 or 2, but 6 was impractical. But James stood his ground. "They've been through enough," he told them firmly. "They've lost their parents, their home, and their safety. The last thing they need is to lose each other." The process wasn't easy. There were background checks, endless forms, home inspections, and long interviews. Some nights, James felt exhausted and wondered if the system would ever approve him. But every time he visited the girls, every time he saw them smile when he walked in, his resolve grew stronger. During this time, James started to prepare his home. His small 2-bedroom house wasn't nearly enough for 6 children, but he made it work. He converted his living room into a sleeping area, bought bunk beds, and filled the walls with bright colors and posters of cartoon characters. He spent hours at thrift stores, finding clothes, shoes, and toys for each of them. When the final approval came through, it was a chilly spring morning. James received the call while sitting in his patrol car during a break. "Mr. Carter," the social worker said, "you've been approved. The girls can come home with you." He didn't even realize his hands were shaking as he put the phone down. A mixture of joy, relief, and nervousness flooded him. This was real now. He wasn't just an officer trying to help. He was about to become a father to 6 children in one day. That afternoon, he drove to the foster care center, where the girls had been staying temporarily. They were waiting for him in the lobby, bags packed, wearing mismatched clothes, but smiling from ear to ear. Emily ran up first, followed by the others, all talking at once, telling him about their morning, their breakfast, and how they had been counting the hours until he came. "Are you ready to go home?" James asked. They all nodded, and in that moment, home didn't mean a building or a place. It meant being together. As they drove away, The girls sat quietly at first, looking out the windows. But soon, laughter filled the car as they pointed out dogs on the street, people riding bikes, and kids playing in yards. For the first time in what seemed like forever, they felt safe. That night, as James tucked each one into bed, some in the new bunk beds, others in sleeping bags on the floor, he realized how tired he was. But it wasn't the kind of tired that came from work. It was the tiredness of a heart that had given everything it had. And yet, he knew he had received something even greater in return. Before he turned off the lights, Emily whispered, "Good night, Dad." It was the first time any of them had called him that. And just like that, the title police officer no longer defined him. He was something far more important now. The first morning in James Carter's house was unlike anything he had ever experienced. For 15 years, his mornings had been quiet, almost predictable, coffee brewing, radio news in the background, and the sound of his boots as he got ready for patrol. But now, the sun had barely risen when the house came alive. Giggles, footsteps, and the sound of cupboard doors slamming echoed through every corner. In the kitchen, James found two of the girls, Lily the youngest and Hannah the second. Youngest standing on chairs, rummaging through the cereal boxes as if they were treasure chests. "Are you making breakfast?" James asked, trying to hide a smile. "We're helping," Lily said proudly, pouring what could only be described as half the box of cornflakes into a single bowl. James chuckled. "That's enough breakfast for a week, kiddo." In the living room, Emily, the oldest, was helping the others fold the blankets they had used as makeshift bedding the night before. James noticed how naturally she had taken on the role of the big sister, making sure the younger ones were dressed and ready. There was something in her eyes, a maturity, that came too soon for someone her age. The first few days were a mix of chaos and learning. James quickly realized that being a police officer hadn't prepared him for the delicate art of braiding hair, finding matching socks, or settling an argument over who got the special blue cup. He also learned that children had an endless ability to ask questions about the police, about his life, about the world, and that they often asked them all at once. But there were moments that melted his heart. Like when little Sophie, the shyest of the six, slipped a crayon drawing into his hand. It was a wobbly picture of a man with 6 stick-figure girls around him, all smiling. Above it, in shaky letters, it read, "Our family. The first challenge." With space. James's small house had only 2 bedrooms, and the bunk beds took up most of one room. The rest of the girls slept in the living room on mattresses James had borrowed from friends. It wasn't perfect, but nobody complained. For the girls, having a roof over their heads and someone who cared was already more than they'd had in years. Food became another adventure. James was used to cooking simple meals for one: eggs, toast, maybe a sandwich. Now he found himself flipping pancakes by the dozen and learning that each girl had her own unique tastes. Lily refused to eat anything green. Hannah put ketchup on everything, and Sophie wouldn't touch her food unless it was cut into tiny pieces. Evenings were the best part of the day. After dinner, they would all gather in the living room, either playing board games, reading stories, or watching old Disney movies. James, who hadn't watched cartoons in decades, found himself laughing harder than the kids at some of the scenes. One night, as they all sat together watching a movie, James looked around and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just his house anymore, it was their home. The girls didn't look like lost, scared children anymore. They were starting to smile more, laugh more, and trust more. And James realized that, for the first time in a long time, he was smiling more too. But it wasn't all easy. The scars of their past showed in small, heartbreaking ways. Emily flinched whenever someone raised their voice, even if it was just. In excitement, Hannah refused to sleep without the light on. Lily would sometimes wake up crying from nightmares, and Sophie had a habit of hiding food in her room just in case. James didn't try to force them to change overnight. Instead, he met each fear with patience. If Lily had nightmares, he would sit by her bed until she fell back asleep. If Sophie hid food, he would gently explain that there would always be enough to eat. If Emily looked nervous, he'd reassure her that no one was going anywhere. School was another big step. On the first day, James drove all 6 girls to the local elementary and middle schools. They clung to him nervously, afraid of being the new kids, but by the time he picked them up, they were bubbling with stories about their teachers, classmates, and the playground. The community began to notice the change too. Neighbors would wave as James and the girls walked to the park. The local grocery store cashier knew them all by name within a week. People were curious about the story. The police officer who suddenly had 6 daughters, but they were also supportive, offering hand-made-down clothes, toys, and even help with homework. One evening, James sat on the porch, sipping coffee while the girls played in the yard. Emily joined him, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. She handed one to him and said quietly, "We're really happy here." James looked at her and felt an unexpected lump in his throat. "I'm glad," he said simply. That moment stayed with him. It was a reminder that the choice he had made, a choice many would have called impossible, was already changing. Lives, not just theirs, but his own. And so, the days turned into weeks. Slowly, the house that had once been silent now overflowed with life. It was messy, noisy, and full of challenges, but it was also filled with laughter, love, and a sense of belonging that no one could take away. For James Carter, a new beginning didn't mean starting over. It meant building something entirely new, a family stitched together not by blood, but by kindness, trust, and an unshakable bond. Asterisk, asterisk. The days slowly began to settle into a rhythm at James Carter's home. There was still plenty of noise, still the occasional argument over toys or who got to sit in the front seat. But there was also something new in the air. Warmth. It was the kind of warmth that doesn't come from a heater, but from knowing you belong somewhere. For the first time in a long time, the girls were not living in survival mode. They didn't have to worry about where their next meal would come from, whether someone would yell at them for no reason, or if they would have to move again. They were beginning to trust that James would be there every single day, no matter what. It wasn't an overnight change. Healing never is. Each girl carried invisible scars from the years before they met James. But day by day, small, almost unnoticed moments began to chip away at the walls they had built around themselves. One evening, James came home late from his shift, expected to find the girls asleep, but instead, they were all sitting in the living room waiting for him. Emily, the oldest, spoke first. "You didn't eat dinner, did you?" she asked. James shook his head, smiling. "I grabbed something quick at the station." Without a word, the girls began bustling around the kitchen, reheating leftovers, and setting the table. They weren't just feeding him, they were showing him they cared. It was a small gesture, but to James, it felt like a milestone. Another turning point came one Saturday afternoon, when the weather was warm enough for a picnic. James loaded the car with sandwiches, juice boxes, and an old blanket. At the park, the girls ran barefoot on the grass, their laughter ringing out like music. For a while, James just sat on the blanket watching them. The way Hannah tried to chase butterflies. The way Sophie sat quietly making daisy chains. The way Lily's curls bounced as she jumped. He realized something important that day. Love wasn't just about providing food, shelter, and clothes. It was about creating moments where joy could exist freely. There were still hard moments. Hannah had a habit of shutting down completely when she was upset, refusing to speak for hours. Sophie sometimes hoarded small items, a habit from her past where she never knew what might be taken away. Emily felt the need to take on responsibilities that weren't hers. as if she feared everything would fall apart without her. James didn't try to fix them. Instead, he met each situation with patience. When Hannah shut down, he would simply sit nearby, letting her know she wasn't alone. When Sophie hoarded things, he gently reminded her that nothing in their home was going to disappear without reason. And with Emily, he reassured her that she was allowed to be a kid, that he was the adult now. And she didn't have to carry the weight of the world anymore. Slowly, the girls began to feel safe enough to show affection in ways they hadn't. Before, Lily would climb into James's lap without hesitation. Hannah started calling him Dad more often, sometimes even in front of strangers. Sophie began leaving her little crayon drawings on his desk at work. One night, as James tucked Emily into bed, she looked at him and said, "I used to think people only cared about you if you were perfect. But you don't care if we make mistakes." Shh. James smiled. "That's because mistakes don't change how much I care. Love isn't something you have to earn. You already have it." Emily didn't say anything else, but the way she smiled told him those words had found their place in her heart. As the months passed, the changes became even more visible. The girls began excelling in school. Hannah joined the school choir, and Emily made the debate team. Lily learned how to ride a bike, and Sophie became obsessed with baking, often leaving the kitchen covered in flour, but beaming with pride over her creations. The house was no longer just a shelter. It was alive with inside jokes. Birthday, celebrations, and bedtime stories. It was a place where tears were met with hugs and mistakes were met with understanding. One rainy Sunday, they all decided to build a blanket fort in the living room. They spent hours stacking chairs, draping sheets, and stringing up fairy lights. Inside, they told silly stories, ate popcorn, and listened to the rain tapping against the windows. At one point, Lily looked around at everyone and whispered, "This is my favorite day ever." James didn't say it out loud, but he thought the same thing. Through these moments, James realized the true power of love. It didn't erase the past, but it gave the future a different shape. It made people braver, softer, and more hopeful. It turned a group of strangers into a family. And while James had stepped into this journey thinking he was saving 6 little girls, he was beginning to understand the truth. They were saving him, too. Asterisk, asterisk. The early years had been full of laughter, bedtime stories, and warm family moments. But as time passed, James Carter began to notice subtle changes in the girls. The once wide-eyed children were growing up, and with adolescence came new storms. The first sign was with Emily. At 16, she had started pulling away, spending more time in her room, her music blasting behind a closed door. She wasn't angry all the time, but there was a distance in her eyes that James couldn't ignore. One night, after a particularly tense dinner where Emily barely said a word, James knocked gently on her door. "What's going on, kiddo?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied, her voice muffled, but James knew better. Over the next few weeks, he realized that Emily was struggling with who she was, not just as a teenager, but as someone who had grown up with a complicated past. She didn't like being labeled the girl the cop adopted. She wanted to be seen for herself, not just for the story that had brought her into his life. Then there was Hannah, who entered her rebellious phase with full force. She started testing boundaries, coming home later than she was supposed to, arguing about rules, and insisting she didn't need anyone telling her what to do. James tried to stay calm, but there were nights when he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the clock, worried until he heard the sound of the front door. Lily and Sophie, still younger, were caught between wanting to grow up and wanting to stay. Children, they looked to their older sisters for guidance, which sometimes meant copying their good habits, and sometimes their bad ones. The hardest moments were the fights, not physical, but emotional battles that left everyone drained. The girls were pushing against the limits, trying to figure out who they were in a world that hadn't always been kind to them. And James, though steady and patient, felt the weight of it all. One evening, after a heated argument with Hannah about her friends, James found himself sitting alone in the darkened living room. He wondered if he was failing them. Being a police officer had taught him to handle dangerous situations, but nothing had prepared him for the emotional complexity of raising 6 young women. The turning point came unexpectedly. One rainy night, Emily didn't come home on time. James called her friends, checked the usual places, and finally found her sitting alone at the park. Her hood pulled over her head. "You scared me," he said quietly as he sat beside her on the wet bench. She didn't look at him. "I just needed space." "I get that," he replied. "But you need to understand. I'm not here to control you, okay? I'm here to protect you. I made a promise to keep you safe, and that means I'll come looking for you every single time, no matter how old you get." For the first time in weeks, Emily's voice softened. "I know. I don't know who I'm supposed to be." James put an arm around her. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. You just have to know you're not alone in figuring it out." That conversation didn't magically erase the tension, but it opened a door. Emily started talking to him more, and slowly, the walls began to lower again. Hannah's turning point came a few months later. After skipping class one day, she was caught by the school counselor, who called James. Instead of yelling, James took her to a diner after school. They sat in a booth, the smell of fries in the air, and he listened as she explained how she felt. Left out, misunderstood, and restless. "You think I don't get it?" James said. "But I was your age once. I made mistakes. I pushed people away. But here's the thing, the people who care about you, they're the ones who stick around, even when you make it hard." Hannah stared at her milkshake, then mumbled, "You're still here." "Always," James said. The younger girls faced their own struggles. Sophie dealt with anxiety before big exams, convinced she would fail even when she studied hard. Lily began to feel overshadowed by her older sister's achievements. James learned to balance his attention, celebrating each girl's unique victories. Whether it was a high grade, a soccer goal, or simply having the courage to try something new, the hard years taught James an important truth. Love wasn't always warm and easy. Sometimes it was standing firm in the face of slammed doors. Sometimes it was waiting in the car until a teenager was ready to talk. Sometimes it was quietly leaving a note under a bedroom door saying, "I believe in you." There were still moments of joy that reminded him why he had chosen this path. Family dinners where someone told a joke so funny they all laughed until their stomachs hurt. Road trips where they sang off-key to old songs. Late-night talks in the kitchen when one of the girls couldn't sleep. By the end of those turbulent years, James realized something profound. They had all grown, not just the girls, but him too. The challenges had forced him to listen more, to let go of his need to have all the answers, and to trust that love could survive even the hardest seasons. The hard years hadn't broken them. They had forged them into something stronger, a family that had learned to weather storms together. Years had passed since the night officer James Carter found 6 frightened girls in an abandoned building, the small, chaotic home that once smelled of crayon drawings. Burnt pancakes and laundry detergent had slowly transformed into something even greater, a place where dreams were built. The girls were no longer little children. They were young women now, each walking her own path, yet carrying with her the values James had quietly instilled over the years. Emily, the oldest, had become a lawyer. She had chosen family law because she knew what it felt like to be voiceless in a complicated system. Her cases weren't just about legal papers, they were about giving children the same fighting chance she and her sisters had been given. Hannah, once the rebel, had found her passion in teaching. She now worked at an inner-city school, her classroom walls covered in colorful posters and motivational quotes. She had a gift for connecting with students others had written off. because she recognized the same fire in them that had once burned inside her. Sophie, the quiet artist of Dumpty Safe. The quiet artist of... The family had opened a small bakery that was quickly becoming the most beloved spot in town. The shop was filled with the smell of fresh bread, laughter, and a chalkboard that always had the words "Made with Love" written at the top. Lily, who had once refused to eat anything green, had grown into a talented nurse. She worked long, exhausting hours, but she always made time to check in on her patients with warmth and kindness. The two middle sisters, Grace and Chloe, had chosen careers that let them see the world. Grace was a journalist, writing stories that exposed injustice and inspired change, while Chloe had become a social worker, determined to help children who were living the kind of life she and her sisters had once escaped. James watched all of this with a quiet pride that words could never capture. He had raised them to believe they could be anything, and now they were living proof of it. But more than their careers, it was the people they had become that mattered to him. They were kind, they were brave, and they were deeply connected. Not just to each other, but to him. Despite their busy lives, the girls visited often. They still had Sunday dinners at James's house whenever they could, filling the kitchen with the same laughter and chaos of years past. He never told them. But those evenings were his favorite moments in life. The transformation hadn't been just theirs. James had changed, too. The once solitary man who lived for his work now lived for his family. He had learned patience beyond what he thought possible. He had learned to listen more than speak, to comfort more than command, and to trust in the slow, quiet work of love. He had also learned that being a father didn't end when the children grew up. They still called him when they needed advice, still sent him pictures of milestones, still came to him for comfort when life got hard. And James, without hesitation, was always there. But what James didn't know was that, behind the scenes, the six sisters had been working on something big. For years, they had talked about how much he had sacrificed for them. They remembered the nights he stayed up late, helping with school projects. The years he went without buying things for himself so they could have what they needed, the way. He always put their dreams ahead of his own. They wanted to give him something that would show him just how much he meant to them. Something more than a thank you card or a dinner. Something that would last. The way his love had lasted for them. Emily was the one who first brought the idea to the table during one of their Sunday dinners. "What if," she began slowly, "we bought Dad a house?" At first, the others stared at her in shock. "A house?" Lily said. "Like a real house?" "Yes," Emily replied. "The one he's always dreamed about. With the big porch and the garden, he spent his whole life giving to us. It's time we give him something back." From that night on, the plan took shape. Each sister contributed what she could, pooling together savings over months. Hannah took on extra tutoring jobs. Sophie sold special baked goods at her shop. Grace and Chloe picked up freelance projects, and Lily worked overtime shifts at the hospital. Emily handled the legal side of things, quietly searching for the perfect place. They found it a beautiful, old-fashioned home with a wide wraparound porch, a backyard big enough for family gatherings, and a small workshop where James could tinker with his woodworking projects. It was everything they knew he would love. They kept it a secret for months, making excuses for why they were so busy or why they seemed distracted during visits. Finally, on a warm summer afternoon, they told James they were taking him out for a family picnic. When they pulled up in front of the house, James looked confused. "Whose place is this?" he asked. Emily smiled. "Yours?" James frowned. "What do you mean, mine?" Hannah handed him a small envelope. Inside was a set of keys and a letter signed by all six of them. The letter thanked him for every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment he had put them first. It told him how he had changed the course of their lives, and how they wanted to give him a place that would finally be his. James stood there, speechless, the keys in one hand and the letter in the other. His eyes brimmed with tears as he looked. At each of them, I don't deserve this, he managed to say. Emily shook her head. Dad, you deserve this and so much more. This is just a fraction of what you've given us. They walked him inside, showing him every room. The porch swing they had installed. The framed family photos already hanging on the walls. In the kitchen, Sophie had even stocked the cabinets with his favorite snacks. James stood in the middle of the living room, taking it all in. He realized this wasn't just a house, it was a symbol. A symbol of love, of family, of the fact that 20 years ago, when he made the choice to take in 6 frightened girls, it had been the best decision of his life. And now, those same girls had given him something he never expected, not just a home, but proof that love, once given freely, always comes back. The sun was warm that afternoon, casting golden light across the wraparound porch of the new house. James Carter still couldn't believe it was his. For days, he'd been waking up early just to walk through each room, running his fingers along the walls as if they might disappear. But today was different. Today, the 6 women who had once been 6 frightened girls were coming over for what they called a special evening. He didn't know what that meant, but he had learned long ago that when his daughters planned something, it was bound to be memorable. He had no idea just how unforgettable this night would be. The sound of cars pulling into the driveway broke his thoughts. One by one, they stepped out, Emily in her neat work blazer, Hannah in her casual jeans and sneakers, Sophie carrying a covered cake box, Lily still in her nurse's scrubs, Grace with her camera slung over her shoulder, and Chloe holding a bouquet of fresh flowers. All right, Dad, Emily said with a smile as they reached the porch. Tonight is about you. James raised an eyebrow. You've already given me more than I could ever ask for. You think this is about the house? Hannah grinned. Oh no, this is bigger. Inside, the dining room table was set beautifully, candles flickering, plates perfectly arranged, and the smell of Sophie's cooking filling the air. But there was something else. On the far wall, a large white sheet had been hung up, with a small projector facing it. What's all this? James asked, looking from one daughter to another. Sit, Chloe said gently, and no questions. Just watch. James took a seat, feeling a mix of curiosity and confusion. The lights dimmed, and the projector came to life. The first image was old, grainy, and faded. It was the photo taken the day he adopted them, all 6 girls standing awkwardly in front of his small, old house. They looked shy, unsure, their clothes mismatched. And there he was in the middle, smiling nervously. Not yet knowing the journey ahead, the pictures began to change, each one telling a piece of their shared story. Birthdays with homemade cakes. School plays where James sat in the front row. Christmas mornings where wrapping paper covered the floor. Road trips in the beat-up old van. Even silly snapshots of them cooking together, or all piled on the couch in pajamas. As the slideshow played, James heard their voices narrating. That's the day you taught me to ride a bike, even though I fell about 50 times. Lily's voice said over one picture. That's when you stayed up all night helping me build my science fair volcano. Sophie added in another. That's the morning you came to my school debate, even though you'd worked a double shift. The night before, Emily's voice came softly. Each photo brought back a flood of memories. And with each voice, James felt something heavy building in his chest. He could hear the emotion in their words, the love woven into every story. Then the images shifted again, now showing the girls as they were today. Emily in a courtroom, Hannah in her classroom, Sophie at her bakery, Lily in her nurse's uniform, Grace interviewing someone for a story. Chloe walking hand in hand with the child she was helping as a social worker. And then, their voices again. You showed us what love looks like. You gave us a family when we had none. You never gave up on us, even when we made it hard. You taught us to fight for the life we want. The final picture appeared, all 6 of them standing in front of the new house. Arms around each other, with a space left in the middle where James now sat in real life. Emily's voice came one last time. This house was our gift to you. But the truth is, Dad, nothing we could ever buy would come close to the gift you gave us, the gift of a life worth living. We are who we are because of you, and we just want you to know, you are our hero. Bye. The time the slideshow ended, James's hands were pressed against his face. He was crying not the quiet, controlled tears of a man holding himself together, but the kind of tears that come when a heart can no longer contain everything inside. The girls moved toward him, surrounding him in a tight circle. Emily placed her hand on his shoulder. We wanted you to see what you've done for us, Dad. All of it. Every moment. James shook his head, still trying to speak through the lump in his throat. You think I gave you something, but you gave me everything. I didn't save your lives. You saved mine. They stayed like that for a long moment, all 7 of them tangled in a group hug. The room filled with nothing but quiet sniffles and the sound of rain beginning to patter against the windows. When they finally sat down for dinner, the atmosphere was lighter, but the emotion lingered. They laughed, they teased, they told old stories, but every now and then, James would catch one of them smiling at him with that look. The one that said, "We remember, we'll always remember." Later that night, after they'd gone home, James walked through the new house. It was quiet now, but it didn't feel empty. Every corner seemed to echo with the love that had filled it earlier. He stopped in the living room where the projector had been and looked at the blank wall. He could still see the images in his mind, still hear their voices. He realized then that the real reward wasn't the house, or the slideshow, or even the beautiful dinner. The real reward was knowing that 20 years of love, sacrifice, and patience had grown into something extraordinary. 6 women who carried his heart with them wherever they went. And that, he thought, was more than he had ever dreamed possible. Years had passed since the surprise at the new house, but the memory of that day never faded for James Carter. It wasn't just a day of celebration. It was proof that love, once planted, grows roots that reach far beyond a single lifetime. Life for James had settled into a gentle rhythm. His daughters, now women in their own right, were scattered across different cities, pursuing their careers and building lives of their own. Yet, they never drifted far from him. Every few weeks, there was a phone call, a visit, or a Sunday dinner, where the kitchen filled with the same laughter and chaos it had too. Decades earlier, the new house had become more than a home. It was the family's gathering place. Christmases were loud and bright, with wrapping paper covering the floor and the smell of Sophie's cinnamon rolls in the air. Summers meant backyard barbecues where James grilled while Hannah organized. Games for the younger nieces and nephews. Over the years, the family had grown, and James now had a small army of grandchildren who adored their Grandpa Jay. But the most remarkable part wasn't just how much the family had expanded. It was how far their kindness had reached. Each of the girls carried the lessons James had taught them into the world, and it began to ripple outward in ways even he hadn't expected. Emily, as a lawyer, had taken on pro bono cases for foster children, determined to make sure no child slipped through the cracks. More than once, she told a frightened little boy or girl, "You're going to be okay. I know because someone once told me the same thing." Hannah, in her classroom, had a special shelf filled with extra snacks and supplies. For anyone who needs it, she told her students, never asking questions or making them feel ashamed. She'd learned from James that dignity mattered just as much as help. Sophie's Bakery became famous not just for its pastries, but for its pay-forward wall, where customers could buy a coffee or meal for someone in need. "It's not charity," Sophie would say with a smile. "It's just what families do for each other." Lily, the nurse, was known in her hospital for sitting with patients long after her shift ended, holding their hands when they had no one else. Grace's journalism had sparked real change, exposing injustices and telling stories of resilience. Chloe's work as a social worker had directly saved dozens of children from neglect and abuse. They weren't just successful, they were living proof that kindness, once given, multiplies. James never took credit for any of it. Whenever people praised him, he would simply say, "I just did what anyone should do." But deep down, he knew the truth. The choice he made that cold night 20 years ago had started something much bigger than himself. One autumn afternoon, the town invited James to speak at a community event. It was meant to honor local heroes, and though James tried to decline, insisting he wasn't a hero, the girls insisted he go. When he stepped onto the stage, he looked out at the crowd. He saw familiar faces, neighbors, old colleagues from the police force, and, of course, all 6 of his daughters sitting together in the front row, smiling at him the way they always had. "I don't think of myself as someone special," James began. "I'm just a man who saw 6 little girls one night and couldn't walk away. That's all. But here's what I've learned in the years since. Kindness doesn't end with one act. It keeps going. It grows. It changes people. And sometimes, it comes back to you in ways you never imagined." He paused, looking at his daughters. "I didn't rescue them. We rescued each other. They taught me more about love, patience, and resilience than I could ever teach them. And if there's one thing I want anyone to remember, it's this. You don't need to be perfect, or rich, or powerful to change someone's life. You just need to be willing to care." When he finished, the crowd stood and clapped. But James barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on his daughters, who were clapping the loudest dot in the years that followed. The Carter family became something of a local legend. People told their story at community gatherings, in schools, even in news articles. Strangers would sometimes stop James on the street just to say, "I heard about you. Thank you for what you did." But James always gave the same answer. "It wasn't just me." As time went on, James slowed down. His hair turned silver and his steps became more careful, but the spark in his eyes never faded. The porch swing on his house became his favorite spot, a place where he could sip coffee. In the morning, watch the sun set in the evening, and greet anyone who happened to walk by, and always, without fail, the girls kept coming home. Sometimes all at once, sometimes in smaller groups, but never letting too much time pass without a visit. They still called him Dad, but in recent years, they'd also begun to call him something else. Our foundation, Us. Because that's what he had been all along. On his 75th birthday, the entire family gathered again, just like they had the day they gave him the house. Grandchildren ran across the yard, daughters helped set up food, and laughter filled every corner. As the sun dipped below the horizon, James looked around at the dozens of faces, his daughters, their spouses, their children, their friends. It struck him then, the choice he made 2 decades earlier had not just changed 6 lives. It had created a legacy. Not the kind of legacy built from wealth or fame, but one made of love, the kind that passes from person to person, generation to generation, until it becomes a part of the world itself. And as he blew out the candles, on his cake, surrounded by the family he had once only dreamed of, James Carter knew that his story, their story, would live on, long after he was gone, because kindness once given never truly ends.